Welcome back to Surviving Your Computer. This is the second part of a three-part series on computer ergonomics. And the main thread of this presentation is assuming the optimal, best possible seated position so that you can experience more ease in your body and sail through the day in more comfortable fashion. We're going to look at some additional factors that come into play when it comes to finding this optimal position, seated position. We're going to look at your ability to read the screen and to interface in a constructive way, productive way, with your control elements such as the keyboard, the mouse, and other pointing devices. So I want us to look at this slide because you need to know that gravity pulls 24 hours a day, and gravity always wins. And in order to minimize muscle strain, discomfort, loss of energy, and the resulting loss of concentration, is going to be important that you find an efficient seated position. The main point ergonomic principle that we covered in the first presentation was that you need to adjust your equipment according to your predetermined seated position. So what you will be doing is pulling the chair away from the computer station, adjusting the movable parts to the unique characteristics of your body, and then bringing back that chair and adjusting the rest of the equipment to this predetermined seated position. We are now going to look at today at the visual factor in terms of affecting your posture. We're going to look at the distance of the screen, the angle, and very important, the lighting, as well as your ability to reach the control elements. So first I want to introduce you to the concept of reflection and glare. Reflection, by definition, is light that bounces off of the surface and that reaches the eye. In this slide, you can see that the sources of reflection are the sun coming through the window and the overhead lighting. This light bounces off of the screen. It's a problem because it creates, on top of the image you want to see generated from the computer, you have an added image of your background. So that creates muscle strain and actually brain strain because you have to differentiate between what's on the screen and what is reflected. Generally speaking, areas behind you are going to be the areas where you're going to have sources of reflection. Glare, by definition, is blurred light that reaches the eye. You experience glare when you drive at night and you see the headlights of the oncoming traffic. On this slide, we see that the sources of glare are going to be areas, this pinkish area, in front of the computer screen. So we need to minimize reflection and glare so that we can reduce the visual interference and reduce the muscle strain and eye strain and mental strain that these added images and this added light, unwanted light, is going to produce. Remember that your computer screen is already emitting and generating quite a bit of light. So the solutions to dealing with this situation is by reducing the intensity of the light, and I recommend that you have fader switches installed on your lighting system so that you can vary the intensity of the light. Reducing the size, if you don't have overhead lighting, you can reduce the size of the lamps you use. And you can also use panels to deflect the light, such as in front if you have problems with glare, and in the back if you have problems with reflections. Another thing that you can use to focus the light away from your computer is to use baffles to deflect the light from your overhead lamp. And it's a good idea to generally have less lighting in the room when you're working in front of a computer because, as I said, the screen in of itself is generating a lot of light. And if you're going to have less light in that room, you need to have a desktop lamp so that when you do need to accomplish written tasks, you have enough light and don't strain your eyes. This diagram shows that you have two types of workstations. You have a desktop paperwork station, and these are windows, and you have computer stations. Another way to minimize glare and reflection is going to be to keep the computer stations away from the windows. But whether you're on a paperwork desktop or a computer desktop, you still want to have the side of the desk parallel to a source of light, in this case the window, or parallel to the overhead lamps. In this case, this is the side of the desk and this is the overhead lighting. When you're working close to a window, it's important to use the shade to minimize either the glare or the reflection. And never face the window if you're going to be with your station close to a window. Another thing that you can do to minimize reflection is to play with the computer screen and tilt it forward or move it slightly sideways. Now when it comes to distance, the range you should play within is anywhere from 22 to 36 inches. The distance is going to be determined by, obviously, your ability to see. So if your glasses are not appropriate, you need to change them. And your ability to see, your predetermined position is the one you're going to want to preserve, and then you have to adapt the position of the monitor based on this predetermined seated position. And so if you need to be at 20 inch, and that's the best distance at which you can see the letters on the screen, then that's the distance you're going to have to select. If you're going to be further away at, let's say, 34 inches, you're going to need to select letters 4 millimeters, and I insist 4 millimeters in height. If it's closer, 22 inches, you can select characters that are 3 millimeter in height. I also recommend that the middle of the screen, unlike on this slide, the middle of the screen meet the level of the line of sight. The idea behind these advice is so as that you minimize eye strain and minimize the possibility of developing headaches. So in the first part, I introduced you to the concept of micro, mini, and macro breaks. So we're going to talk about micro breaks and mini breaks. And the reason you need these breaks is that although you're going to have a predetermined seated position, it's going to be important to move your body parts because we are designed to move. And the way the body works is if you don't use it, you lose it. So yes, you will have a predetermined seated position. No, you don't have to be static. It's important to move. So the first micro break, which lasts anywhere from 20 to 30 seconds, is going to be to look away from your computer screen, look and focus your eyes on an object at a distance. I recommend you do that every 20 minutes. This is not time loss, this is time gain, and it allows the muscle that controls your lens, your ability to focus, to relax. Imagine having to contract a large muscle, such as the biceps, in one given position for 2 to 3 hours at a time. You could easily understand that this muscle would end up being exhausted. Well, the same thing can happen to the muscle that controls your lens. The next thing that you can do is during a mini break, and the interesting thing about these breaks is you can make any type of cocktail of exercises and implement any of the exercises I provide based on your developing awareness of what your body needs, what it needs to be relaxed, and enhancing your communication or an understanding of where you hold your tension and where you need to release it. So during this mini break, we're going to do an eye exercise. The mini break, incidentally, lasts from 2 to 3 minutes. So what I'm going to ask you to first do is to use your index fingers and stroke your eyebrows away from the nose outward, and then apply pressure on the bony ridge underneath the eye, and away from the eye, stroke your lower portion. And I recommend that you repeat this movement and you alternate 10 times above and 10 times below. The other exercise you can perform is going to be to imagine that you're looking at a large imaginary clock, and you can focus on every single hour, gazing at every hour and resting there for a few seconds. This will allow you to stretch the muscles that control the movement of the eyeball. Very important to stretch those muscles. Also, you can raise your eyes towards the ceiling without moving your head, and close your eyelids and apply pressure on the bottom eyelid over the white of the eye. And also look downwards and apply pressure on the gentle pressure, I insist, on the white part of the eye. This is going to help circulation and help the organ of sight to be healthy and happy. Another exercise that you can perform during this mini break is going to be to stimulate some acupressure points. So I'd like you to take your thumb and index finger and place it over the bridge of the nose, and then I want you to press inwardly and downward to stimulate these 2 points. Next, you can take your index fingers and place them on the bony ridge where there's a notch and press upward and inward. And the third set of point is going to be underneath your cheekbone, still using your index finger. You can press upward and inward. Now I'd like to cover the forearm, the wrist, and the hand. And for those of you who don't have any symptoms whatsoever or any complaints, usually it's the 23 to 25-year-old computer users, I want you to realize that the average data entry worker will press a key 1.2 million times in a day. So granted, they're not running a marathon or they're not chopping wood, but they are using extensively a part of their body. And when you do that, you need to take care of these structures and maintain them and have good body hygiene when it comes to your hand, wrist area. That's going to mean having proper nutrition, exercising properly the upper body, and stretching it. Now I want us to look at the famous carpal tunnel, but first I'd like you to know that the muscles that control your hand come from your forearm. And the tendons are the part of the muscle that attaches onto the bone. The tendons travel on top of the wrist and at the bottom of the wrist and attach to your fingers. So if you want to be nice to your tendons, you can also choose to massage with using your thumb upwardly on your forearm and covering all surfaces of your forearm. Your tendons will thank you for that. So we have this carpal tunnel. This is a view of the carpal tunnel. This is a transverse section. It's the same. It's as if you were looking at the carpal tunnel from this view and chopping off my hand. This is the famous carpal tunnel. This is an area that's a small, narrow space in which there is tightly packed many structures. You have arteries and veins, you have nerves, and many tendons. We get into trouble when our tendons become inflamed, they swell, and they take up more space, which ends up putting pressure on nerves, arteries, and veins. And that in turn will produce symptoms such as poor circulation in the hand, pain, and loss of ability to grip. So in order to prevent this, we're going to look at some remedial actions that you can take. This slide is to introduce the concept of 0 to 20 degrees. It's important to understand that all of your body parts, if you move them and tilt them for long periods of time in excess of 20 degrees, gravity pulling, you are going to develop muscle cramps, fatigue, tiredness, and strain. And this rule applies for your neck, for your elbows, all bodily parts. But we're looking at the wrist right now. So when you position your wrist in relationship to the control elements, make sure that the angle, whether it's backwards or sideways, is not excessive, and that you don't, for instance, hyperextend your wrists. Especially this happens a lot when people use a roller track or roller ball. And this can, in of itself, this prolonged position can produce tendinitis and problems with your carpal tunnel. I mentioned that this rule applies to all bodily parts. So this is true. You can produce neck strain if you tilt your head forward in excess, if you rotate your head too much, or if you tilt your head sideways, especially when you're cradling a phone while working in front of a computer. So these are things that you cannot invent. You need to learn about it so that you can apply it. So this is the most common mistake made and easily preventable. And you need to have pretty much your hand in alignment with the wrist, knowing that you have a variable of 0 to 15 degrees, 0 to 20 degrees. The other very common mistake is to ignore the sharp edge of the desk, which applies direct pressure on the tendon and restricts its movement to move back and forth, and is a likely candidate to produce inflammation. So a simple remedy to this would be to use a gel pad underneath, and I recommend gel pads because they offer the least amount of counter pressure. And I would like you to buy a gel pad that has gel that can easily disperse under the weight of your forearm. That way you minimize the amount of pressure on the tendon. And it's more pliable and adaptable. Another thing that you need to implement is, as I mentioned in part 1 of this presentation, adjusting properly your armrest height. And you're going to do that by relaxing your shoulders and bringing the armrest to the level of your elbows so that your forearm can rest parallel to the ground. Incidentally, you're going to need to adjust the tabletop so that it's pretty much within 1 inch or 1.5 inches in the same range of the armrest height. Some people do not tolerate the armrest at all. If you're going to remove the armrest altogether, it's important that your tabletop be adjustable in inclination and that the surface, the work surface, be large enough so that you can rest parts of your forearm. Another important thing is going to be to stretch the areas that you use extensively. And the simple stretch that you can perform for your wrist is going to be to bring it downwards, hold it for 10 to 20 seconds, bring it in extension. You can add extra stretch by gently pulling your fingers backward and moving it sideways and pumping your hands to increase circulation, doing this pumping action. Now, when it comes to the keyboard, it's going to be very important that you test drive the different keyboards that are on the market and find the one you feel the most comfortable with. Incidentally, on every keyboard, or most keyboards, you can adjust the amount of counter pressure the keys offer. And based on the nature of your task and your skills, you're going to have to adjust the resistance on the keys to the least amount, and without having to produce errors because it's too sensitive. I also recommend when you're going to be using a mouse, I recommend that you try to become ambidextrous. In other words, develop your ability to use the mouse with both arms. And that is going to help spare your shoulders and your forearms and hands. I also recommend that you use two different types of pointing devices, such as a mouse or a roller ball, and alternate during the day and use one or the other based on, here again, your awareness of where you hold your tension, your awareness of needing to change. There's a new pointing device that's on the market, and I don't have one with me today, but it has this shape, and it's sort of a blend between the mouse and the joystick. And what you have is a little handle here, so that instead of moving the mouse about with your hand and fingers, you end up moving the pointing device with your entire forearm. And there are control elements on the side of the handle and on the top, and you can depress those buttons, and one of the functions is an automatic scroll, so you don't even have to move this pointing device to go down to the page or sideways. So it's a good idea to alternate different pointing devices so that you can use your arm and wrist at different angles of pull and relax certain muscles. Now I want us to look at this slide, and I want you to look and see if you can find what's wrong with this particular presentation. We've discussed seeing, ability to visualize the screen, and the ability to have a ease-filled rapport with the control elements. Obviously, this is not a position of ease. This person is not comfortable. They're having problems straining their eyes, seeing what is on the screen. Their forearms are resting on a sharp edge. There's no padding. The tilting is in excess of 15 degrees, whether it's at the elbow, the wrist, or the fingers. There is no low back support because the person's leaning forward. And this will produce tremendous amount of unnecessary stress on the body, and this can potentially throw you into a state of defense physiology where everything becomes revved up, and you lose, generally speaking, ease throughout your body. So this concludes the second part of our program on surviving your computer. Incidentally, you can obtain all the information that was in the previous program, this one and the subsequent, by contacting my office to obtain the computer user's information package. In part 3, we will be covering additional factors that will help you in using your computer. We'll be covering the macro breaks, the 15-minute breaks, that allow you to further enhance your sense of well-being. And so we will be covering breathing exercises, visualization, how you talk to yourself. We'll be discussing your self-talk. And we will be covering as well additional exercises, stretching exercises, as well as nutrition, the nutrition that your muscles, ligaments, and tendons need to be healthy and thrive. So I want to thank you again for watching this health-enhancing program, and look forward to seeing you again at our next presentation.